Lori Ferguson.
Yeah!
Also, Life member Paul Houston and Warren Gardner. The brand newly elected member of the Upper House, Anthony D'Adam. We have a couple of people that worked really hard in the state election that weren't successful. We have the Seven Hills candidate, Julia Ouэн's. And of course, Parramatta former candidate, Liz Scully. Alan Mascarenas from Epping, former candidate. And we have Maureen Welsh, former councillor.
Yeah.
Maureen Welsh. I know that. Okay, and we have Cumberland Council Deputy Mayor Glen Энмor.
Yes.
Councillors, I'll do them all at once. Pierre Esbert from Parramatta, Sursai Benjamin from Blacktown, Patricia Prosett from Parramatta, Suman Saha from Cumberland, and also Michael Southwood over here, who's been volunteering for me for about 10 years and is about to go to Queensland.
Gave you the visa, mate, to Queensland?
It was me and Wayne Swan. Most of you guys have really put in the last couple of months. In fact, some of you have been putting in with me for years and years and years. Some of you door knocked with me back in 2004, some 15 years ago, when we did our first 35,000 houses. And many of you have been here for the last 40, so we're up well over 75,000 now between us. We win because of that. You know that. We win because we have you on the ground and you make an extraordinary difference. And when you make that difference, you put into Parliament people like Wayne, who really has made a difference in so many ways. Now, those of us that have the great privilege of being in Parliament know that sometimes when you think what are the things you're really proud of, they're really little things, like when the Chinese community told me when I was still a candidate that the big lion heads that they practiced their lion dancing with were too big for the little 6-year-olds, and so I got them 10 little tiny lion heads so the little kids. And strangely enough, when people say, what did you do in your parliamentary life, in spite of all the major things that we did as parties, climate change reform and the National Disability Insurance scheme, sometimes these little things sort of stick out as that made a difference. That kid there with that big lion head, he was one of my little kids. He was 6. He's 6, he's now 20. But Wayne, I'm sure for Wayne it's going to be hard to beat the global financial crisis response.
All the council.
That was the one that kept Australia out of what the rest of the world went through.
Absolutely.
It was a phenomenal achievement. The current government and the Liberals since then have tried to pretend that we took the antibiotics and we didn't get sick, therefore we didn't need to take them. But we did, and we know that. And this man here beside me was absolutely central to that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But he's been in Parliament since 1993, so there's probably a stack of lion heads as well in his past that he would love to tell you about as well. So it's my greatest pleasure to introduce you to the wonderful Wayne Swan in one of his last events as a Member of Parliament. And we honour him, and he honours us by being here with us today.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Julie. I remember coming here and campaigning for you in 2004. And when you won the seat in 2004, I don't think anyone would have thought that you could have then gone on to build up such substantial majorities in this seat. So it says a lot about the commitment of your party members, but it says also a lot about your capacity to campaign. And there are not many people in the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party that would have door-knocked as many houses or taken the approach that you've taken, which is a 7-day-a-week job. You have to be out there with the people all the time. That's how you earn their support and their respect. So you are a model for our caucus in terms of how to connect with a local community. But the other thing that I think about all the time, I take great joy from, was that you knocked out Ross Cameron.
That's right. Yeah. Great.
I don't know whether you've all seen the media today, but some of the Liberal Party who are getting a bit sort of nervy about the election outcome are now advertising themselves as modern Liberals. Well, my view of a modern Liberal is Ross Cameron. Someone who's so bad on race that he gets knocked out of Sky News. Because the big thing that has changed in Australian politics over the last 15 years that you've been a member has been the radicalisation of the right wing of Australian politics and the move of the Liberal Party basically to the crazy right, particularly on critical issues to do with racial equality, gender equality, and the critical issue to the future of the planet, climate change. They have just gone out there with the loony right, and it's one of the reasons that we have Liberal members of Parliament in some of our major cities inventing this new term, modern Liberal. Well, they're not modern Liberals, they're part of a dinosaur party that has inflicted on the people of Australia over the past almost 6 years an extreme form of trickle-down economics, which is causing immense hurt and damage to the egalitarian ethos of the country that we that inspires each and every one of us to be involved in politics. Now, I don't think almost 6 years ago, when we were beaten in 2013, and then we saw the 2014 budget, that many people thought that Labor would have been within a bull's roar of coming back to government in such a short period of time in just 6 years. But we are. We are for a couple of reasons, and I want to talk about them today, not just good local members like Julie, but although they're very important. We are first and foremost because of the unparalleled degree of unity and consensus that we've got around our leadership with Bill Shorten and Tanya Plibersek. But we are also coming back because we've got a very progressive, particularly economic framework based around inclusive prosperity, which fundamentally rejects the extremism of the trickle-down economics practiced by the Liberal Party, and which is getting a lot of traction in our community. When we stood up in 2014 and opposed completely all of those measures of neoliberalism, if you want to call it that, I prefer to call it trickle-down economics, which basically were encapsulated in that budget. And what are they? Tax cuts for very high income earners and large corporations, deregulation of the powerful, massive cuts to the social safety net, particularly in health and education, but also in vital areas of income support, and wage suppression for everybody else. That was the essence of the program that was put forward then by Tony Abbott. And of course continued in a more extreme form by Scott Morrison when he became Treasurer, and put in place tax cuts for large corporates of $80 billion, $17 billion which were to go to the big banks, and a reframing of the personal income tax system to give 60% of tax cuts to the highest income earners in the top 20%, which still is their framework. And I thought, gee, you know, what could be more extreme, first of all, than Tony Abbott, then Turnbull and Scott Morrison, and then you get Scott Morrison as Prime Minister. They keep moving to the right. They keep moving to the right. And their tactic over the last 6 years, but really ever since Tampa in 2001, has been to try and use xenophobia and the politics of race to cover up their wealth concentration agenda. That's really been the modus operandi of the modern Liberal Party under Abbott and Turnbull and now Morrison. And what we've seen, particularly with One Nation over recent days, is nothing has changed. And whilst Morrison has been forced to move over a little bit on preferences, we've still got the National Party in bed with One Nation, which means a vote for the Liberals and the National Party is a vote for One Nation in this election. And this is going to be very much part and parcel of the debate. Now, we are in front, we've done well, but we cannot underestimate the extent of the scare campaign that is going to come from the Liberal Party. And I want to talk a little bit about this because you referred, Julie, to the global financial crisis. It was 10 years ago, this time of the year, 10 years ago, we were rolling out our second stimulus package, which was the package that saved Australia from recession and gave us economic strength for 4 or 5 years when the rest of the world were on their knees.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Our economy now is 33% larger than it was at the end of 2007. The American economy is only about 20. The British economy is 15. And some economies are still smaller. So what we did during that period was absolutely essential to cohesion in our economy and to social equity in our society. But who opposed that every step of the way? The modern Liberals, who did everything they could to stop us from preventing a recession in Australia. And I raise that because it tells you what they're now going to be like with their backs really against the wall. I've lost a seat in Parliament. I lost my seat in 1996. There is no such thing as an unlosable seat, and there's no such thing as an unlosable election. And no matter how, whatever comfort we take from the polling now, we've still got a huge mountain to climb, because the power of vested interests in this country do not give up elections easily. They don't, and I've seen these people, I've met with them, I know what they're like, I know how ruthless they are, I know how they deploy their money, and I know we've still got a fight on our hands. One of the reasons why I'm going to continue to be in politics but not in Parliament, and one of the reasons why I took on the national presidency of the ALP, which hopefully many of you voted for me. And if you didn't, think again. But I want to make this point because this is a very important moment in the future of global politics and in the future of social democratic parties like ours. Now, 10 years ago, when the world was experiencing a global recession, we talked about economic volatility not seen in 80 years, not seen since the Great Depression. 10 years on, what are we seeing around the world? We're seeing political volatility, not seen for 90 years. Why is that the case? That's the case because big economic shocks have big political consequences. 1929 was followed by 1939. And I myself am quite fearful about where the world is. Because what's happened in the last 10 years is parties of the centre left have lost comprehensively right around the world. Our party is one of the few that's in good health, still fighting, and in prospect of coming back to government. You go to France, you go right through Western Europe, you see the rise of fascism in Hungary and places like that. You see the activities of Putin exporting his form of authoritarianism. There are big challenges in the world, and they relate to the fact that people are very unsettled by the rampant wealth and income inequality they are finding in their nations around the world, both in the developed and also in the developing world. Because when people feel that their living standards are not going to be any better, or they're going to decline, or their children are not going to achieve the same living standard they had, or are going backwards, sometimes people look for authoritarian solutions. So the very special responsibility on the Australian Labor Party, and the New Zealand Labor Party for that matter, to stand and fight and win on a program of inclusive growth, and one which rejects the authoritarianism and the use of race as a political weapon in politics. Very special responsibility on us to win this election by putting in place a program which takes on a lot of the power of entrenched wealth and entrenched interest and delivers a form of inclusive growth. And we're doing that. But with that comes big political risk and a big target strategy that the big money that's going to lose from what we do will deploy in this election campaign. And that's why we need people power. That's why we need people going from door to door. That's why we need people out there active in their local communities, alerting them to the fact when they start the misleading campaigns about the impact of negative gearing, dividend imputation credits, you name it, we have a fair and equitable proposal for Australia which is good for growth, good for living standards and good for the future of democracy. Because that is what is on the line in many parts around the world. So savour this moment. Think about what we've got to do. You've got to be bold or you're dead. We're bold, we've got to win. We've been bold, we've got to win. We've got to win because we've got a democratic program that insists that people look after one another, that acknowledges that each and every one of us has got a stake in the success of the person standing beside us, whoever they are or wherever they come from. Because the thing about unequal societies is they devalue the moral worth of individuals who are losing. And when that happens, you get people embittered, politics becomes divisive. So that is what we're fighting. We're fighting for a set of values which are in the core of a set of policies which go back to the very tradition in which our party was formed. So that is what is on the line in this election campaign. So we need you all to pitch in, but not just for this election campaign. We need to strengthen our movement across the board outside the periods of elections. And if we can win this election, and we can go on to strengthen our party and dig in deeper and rid ourselves of this virus in this country that has come to locate itself in the modern Liberal Party, that is a survival of the fittest ideology, which is quite prepared to take on authoritarian thoughts and movements and trades to win elections and give them the thumping defeat they deserve. With an even bigger majority in Parramatta.
That'll happen.
Anyway, it's good to be here with you. It's good to see Lori here, Pierre, a number of other people around the room that I've seen around conferences and so on. And you know, as your party president, I'll be back at some stage wandering through Western Sydney. But let's get stuck into this campaign and let's win. Thank you.
Thank you.